Hello, everyone. We're going to begin this episode as we always do with our passage of the week. Our passage of the week is in Hebrews. Hebrews 13:8 says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. King James Version says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. You know, I wanted to bring this up to you guys because this is an important reminder. I was talking to someone I'm very close to about the most recent debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And without going into too much about what he personally thought about it, he ended up turning it off because he got so frustrated of all the lies, bickering back and forth. It was extremely frustrating to him. So without really knowing what to do, he didn't really know who else to turn to. He prayed, him and his wife. And just had the realization after that Jesus is on the throne no matter what, that we can trust him. He is always with us, and that no matter what happens, he is always in control. He's a king that is not up for re-election. He does not have an elective monarchy. He is our sovereign, our unquestionable sovereign. And that brings a lot of peace when you really think about it. Because in so many cases, we can worry about the direction our world is going, but he is sovereign. So remember that. I would challenge you to just pray on and think of Hebrews 13:8, that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Because this whole thing that I do on here, that I get on here in this podcast and talk to you about, is important. But it's not important if you lose sight of the spiritual battle that we're facing, which is good versus evil. And most importantly, we've won, ultimately. For us to live as Christ and to die as gain. We are to live as lights in the world, and that's our duty, that's our mission. So remember that. Are you being a light to someone, and who are you being a light to? Are you faithfully serving Jesus Christ? I pray that you would seek a relationship with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Thank you guys for your support. Thank you for listening. We talk about politics, but keep your eye on the spiritual battle as well. All right, let's get into the show. Welcome, everyone, to the most recent episode of The Fog in the Whirlwind. Great to be back with you. With everything that's going on up in Springfield, Ohio, I thought it would be prudent to talk to you guys about some of the history of Haiti, because that's the thing that a lot of people don't know about, are the origins of this culture that is now coming to our country and negatively affecting it. I mean, I've covered this before. You can find previous live streams where I've talked about this issue, and don't take my word for it, I've played clips for you of Ohio residents talking about this. You can go on my channel, look into the shorts section, the YouTube shorts section, and you will find several videos of several different residents of Ohio, Springfield, Ohio in particular, talking about this issue. The other thing that's important to talk about here is just how angrily and evil this culture has a history of being. And there's also some serious allegations that I want to get into in a future episode specifically. This specifically I'll talk about in a future episode. The demonic worship and what kind of a culture, what kind of negative effects is that going to have when it comes with our own Christian culture? What kind of contact is happening with this foreign evil religion? So we're going to be talking about that. But in this episode, I want to tell you more about some of the history. So I'm looking forward to talking to you guys about that. We're also going to talk about Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, the possibility of them debating in the future. I'm going to talk to you guys about that. Also, some good news out of Europe. Wow, I mean, does that just never happen? I mean, it feels like it. Feels like there's hardly ever good news out of Europe. It's always, well, this Muslim committed this horrible attack and the people of Germany are doing nothing about it. And here's the people of Sweden doing nothing about it. Well, we're actually going to talk about Sweden, which, as you know, is my fatherland, where my father's fathers came from. So it's my fatherland way back, I will say. Now, I would like to announce the kickoff of Fatherland Fall. I would have talked about this last weekend, but was not able to record. That was the 21st, which was Saturday, but I wasn't able to do an episode. But, you know, the funny thing, I was thinking about this. Nick Fuentes and a couple other people, Andrew Torba, kind of coined White Boy Summer and, what's his name, Posobiec. And then you got Jesse Lee Peterson talking about July being White History Month. And it's like, no, white people love the fall. We love getting around a bonfire, strumming a guitar, sitting by a fire, you know, just kind of shooting the breeze. We also love college football, especially people in the South. And the South is where America's aristocracy is. The best part of the country is the South. And the thing is, too, during the summer, we're miserable. We hate the summer because it's just so hot. I mean, you're talking about 87 on a good day. Usually it's 90, 95, 100 degrees here in the South. And heck, that's just South Carolina. Over in Texas, it's worse. Now it's a little bit of a drier heat. It's worse, though, as far as temperature goes. And then in Florida, it's not only hotter, it's more humid. So God bless fall. We're now going to call this Fatherland Fall. I'm proud to announce the kickoff of Fatherland Fall. So comment, you know, happy Fatherland Fall. I really am glad that it's finally here. As a resident of South Carolina myself, it's very good to finally have some cooler weather, have some pumpkin spice back. Looking forward to Thanksgiving as well. It's a great American tradition as well. And so we're really glad to have fall back with us because it's also right before winter, when winter starts to get a little bit too cold. Fall's the perfect time of year. Can I get an amen? All right. Well, we're now going to actually go into something more serious into the show, but I wanted to announce that for you guys and want to do something special for you guys during Fatherland Fall or Fall in the Fatherland. I'm trying to determine what I want to use. Probably Fatherland Fall. Well, we're going to now be reading from A Disease in the Public Mind by Thomas Fleming. Very good book, recommended to me by a great revisionist historian. Now, we're going to begin in chapter 6, which is called Thomas Jefferson's Nightmare. And I'm going to read the entire chapter for you. Also, if I have time later in this episode, as I said, I will talk about Trump and Harris. I'll talk about immigration in Sweden and some good news there. And then I also want to talk to you guys about my political journey and what I'm thinking right now. Okay, so we're now going to read here chapter 6, Thomas Jefferson's Nightmare, in the book A Disease of the Public Mind by Thomas Fleming. This is about Haiti. Important to note, if you hear Saint Domingue, later called Santo Domingo, again, that is, originally it was French, the Spanish called it something else, but that's modern day Haiti. Very important to note. Saint Domingue equals Haiti. This is Thomas Fleming's A Disease in the Public Mind, Chapter 6, Thomas Jefferson's Nightmare. I'll read this to you, then I'm going to tell you what I think. In 1800, the year after George Washington died, Thomas Jefferson was elected third president of the United States. One of the chief executive's early visitors was Louis-André Pichon, the affable young charge d'affaires of the new French Republic. Jefferson greeted him warmly as the spokesman for a country that had long stirred his deepest political emotions. So that's in the year 1800. I'm sorry for breaking my own rules, but I'm going to stop reading and pause right here. A lot of people love Jefferson. Notice how Jefferson treats a representative of the country right after the French Revolution. The French Revolution that was completely egalitarian, completely against aristocracy, completely against monarchy. A very left-wing movement that was bordering on communism. And Jefferson greets them this way. All right, back to the text. Charles Pichon asked what the president would do or say if Paris sent an army to the rebellious island of Saint-Domingue to restore it to French control. For over a century, France had owned a third of the island. The Spanish, who owned the larger slice, called it Santo Domingo, the name that most Americans used. The French section's sugar, coffee, and indigo plantations had made it France's most valuable overseas possession until the 1789 revolution in Paris triggered a civil war that had wrecked the economy. For American merchants, Saint-Domingue had been a prime customer. In 1790, U.S. exports to the island, mostly food and lumber, accounted to $3 million, second only to the $6.9 million in similar products that the Americans shipped to England. The French Revolution's cry of liberty, equality, and fraternity had reached Saint-Domingue early in the 1790s. The precarious social mixture of royal officials, rich Creole planters, middle-class storekeepers and craftsmen, and free mulattoes was sitting on a potential volcano of 500,000 black slaves whose toil on the plantations created the island's wealth. The mulattoes were almost as numerous as the whites and frequently as wealthy. They owned an estimated 100,000 slaves, but they were forbidden to dress like white men. They could not marry a white woman. They could not carry guns. If a mulatto struck a white man, his hand could be amputated. A white man could strike a mulatto and risk nothing but a fine. The black slaves, called noirs, were kept under control with unspeakable brutalities. This cry of rage from a man who spent half his life as a noir is a grisly summary of French slave owners' tactics. Have they not hung up men with heads downwards, drowned them in sacks, crucified them on planks, buried them alive, crushed them in mortars? Have they not forced them to eat crap? He says the other word, but I'm not going to say it. And having flayed them with the lash, have they not cast them alive to be devoured by worms or in ant hills, or lashed them on stakes in the swamps to be devoured by mosquitoes? Have they not thrown them into boiling cauldrons of cane syrup? Have they not put men and women into barrels studded with spikes and rolled them down mountainsides into the abyss? Have they not consigned these miserable blacks to man-eating dogs until the latter, sated by human flesh, left the mangled victims to be finished off by bayonet and poniard? As early as 1685, a French official wrote, "In the blacks we have undoubtable domestic enemies." Hundreds of slaves fled into the mountains and became Maroons, whose legends had inspired John Brown. Some of these communities lasted for decades, repeatedly repulsing or evading troops sent to destroy them. The most fearsome of these early rebels was one-armed Francois Moscandal, who preached a terrifying doctrine: death to all whites. When war erupted between Great Britain and revolutionary France in 1793 and the Jacobins seized control of the French National Assembly, they issued a declaration freeing all the slaves in France's overseas dominions. The move was motivated only in part by a belief in universal liberty. The radicals also hoped to trigger slave revolts in Jamaica and other English colonies and in the United States. By that time, President George Washington had declared America neutral in the global war, an act the French considered a betrayal of the Treaty of Alliance they had signed with the embryo United States in 1778. When news of the Jacobin decree reached Saint-Domingue, a civil war of unbelievable ferocity exploded, with royalist whites fighting Jacobin whites and mulattoes and blacks, compounded by the invasion of a British army. In the island's prosperous northern plains, slaves came out of the night to burn plantation houses and massacre their owners. All the equipment of sugar production, the boiling houses, the mills, the warehouses, was destroyed. Out of this sanguinary turmoil had emerged a charismatic black leader, Toussaint Louverture, a short, wiry, 47-year-old former coachman and veterinarian on a plantation owned by the Comte de Bordaz. So thin he was nicknamed the Broomstick. Toussaint, I guess, or Toussaint, could read and write and think. He preached equality between blacks and whites and started creating a multiracial society. President John Adams and the Secretary of State Timothy Pickering saw Louverture as an opportunity to frustrate British and French imperialism in the Caribbean and maintain America's lucrative trade with Saint-Domingue. They shipped supplies and ammunition to Louverture's army, and at Alexander Hamilton's suggestion, they sent his boyhood friend Edward Stevens, born on the Danish island of St. Croix, to Saint-Domingue's major port, Cap Francois, where he became Louverture's trusted friend and advisor. The Adams administration even ordered the small American fleet in the Caribbean to show the flag at Cap Francois. Without quite saying it, they urged Louverture to declare independence. Louverture routed the British army and became the de facto ruler of Saint-Domingue. His troops quickly conquered the Spanish part of the island as well. Edward Stevens asked Alexander Hamilton to advise the black leaders on a constitution. True to his authoritarian instincts, Hamilton told Louverture to appoint himself governor-general for life and to enroll every able-bodied man in the militia. An assembly was also added to the governmental structure, but it had no power to initiate legislation. With driving energy, Louverture invited whites, blacks, and mulattoes to join him in restoring a semblance of prosperity to Saint-Domingue. He banned slavery forever, but persuaded most of the former slaves to return to the plantations to work as paid draftees in the service of the state. Unfortunately, he never trusted the slave-owning Americans enough to declare independence. He retained a frequently expressed loyalty to revolutionary France, which had given his race their freedom. In 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte, Sorry if you hear the dog barking, I'm just going to power on through. 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte seized power in France. One of his many careening ambitions was the restoration of France's colonial empire. This was the reason why Pichon visited President Jefferson to ask about Saint-Domingue. Jefferson's reply exceeded Pichon's mostly sanguine hopes. The new president urged Pichon to tell his government that America was eager to help restore French rule in Saint-Domingue. He welcomed France's proposal to send an army to crush the black rebels. Nothing will be easier than for us to furnish your army and fleet with everything and to reduce Toussaint to starvation, Jefferson said. There was a reason for the urgency that Jefferson concealed in his reply. During the 1790s, the upheaval in Saint-Domingue had prompted more than a few white French planters to flee the island for the comparative safety of the United States, where they talked of their often harrowing experiences. Inevitably, American slaves overheard some of these stories and wondered if this triumph over slave owners might be repeated in America. As early as 1793, Virginian John Randolph claimed to have caught two slaves discussing plans for an uprising that would massacre the whites, quote, as the blacks had killed the whites in the French islands, end quote. Other rumors and reports of black plots and threats had swirled through Virginia and other southern states in succeeding years. In 1800, while Jefferson was running against incumbent John Adams for president, Virginia had been shaken by a slave revolt led by a 25-year-old black preacher named Gabriel. Obviously inspired by events on Saint-Domingue, Gabriel had recruited over 1,000 fellow slaves to march on Richmond on the night of August 30th. There they planned to seize the state arsenal, arm themselves, and kill all the whites in the state except a handful of Quakers and Methodists who were, quote, friendly to liberty, end quote. Gabriel and his men had gathered at the appointed hour in woods about 6 miles from Richmond. Before they could march, a violent rainstorm pelted down, washing out bridges and submerging roads. The storm lasted most of the night, forcing the plotters to return to their plantations. The next day, a slave who had refused to join the conspiracy told his master what had almost happened. Governor James Monroe called out hundreds of well-armed state militia with orders to shoot to kill if necessary. Gabriel, his brother, and about 30 others were seized and sentenced to death. Governor Monroe wrote a full report on Virginia's narrow escape and sent a copy to Thomas Jefferson. Telling the grisly news to a Philadelphia friend, the presidential candidate said, "We are truly to be pitied." Those anguished words reveal Jefferson's inner struggle over slavery and his growing conviction that blacks and whites could never be reconciled. That ambivalence had made him ignore or dismiss Toussaint Louverture's attempt to create a multiracial society. Jefferson considered this an impossibility, and he was eager to see Louverture removed from power before his example had inspired more Gabriels to rise in Virginia and other southern states. In Europe, Jefferson's election as president had coincided with the mutual exhaustion of France and Britain after 8 years of global warfare. As peace negotiations began in November 1801, Napoleon shipped a 200,000-man army to Saint-Domingue. I read that wrong. I'm sorry, guys. It's still a little bit sleepy. Napoleon shipped a 20,000-man army, my apologies, to Saint-Domingue, commanded by his brother-in-law, didn't know that, General Charles Leclerc. Sorry, the French pronunciations, I can struggle a little bit. To return to the text, unknown to Jefferson, this expedition had another larger purpose. In March 1801, the Man of Destiny, as Napoleon liked to be called, had browbeaten the reluctant Spanish king into retroceding the immense territory of Louisiana to France. It had been given to Spain in 1763 as compensation for her losses in the Seven Years' War. In secret orders, Bonaparte told Leclerc to transfer the bulk of his army to New Orleans as soon as he restored French supremacy in Saint Domingue, a task that Bonaparte estimated would take only 6 weeks. The goal was the creation of a self-sufficient overseas empire. Louisiana would support and supply Saint Domingue and the other French West Indian islands with food at cut-rate prices, eliminating the need to buy from the Americans. The islands would continue to produce sugar, coffee, and indigo to swell France's depleted exchequer. Ships of other nations would be excluded from carrying this lucrative cargo. A confident Leclerc arrived off the port of Cap Francois in February 1802 and promptly went to work on the Gilded Africans, as Napoleon contemptuously called the black rebels. The size of the French fleet and army made Louverture and his generals more than a little suspicious. It was much too large to be the escort of a delegation from Paris, I'm just going to say Paris, reaffirming France's theoretical sovereignty. The French had sent several of these ambassadors during the previous tumultuous decade. When Leclerc called on Jean Christophe, one of Louverture's best generals, to surrender the port city, he declined. Leclerc promptly attacked from land and sea. Christophe, I don't know, responded by burning Cap Francois and retreating into the countryside. All-out war erupted throughout Saint Domingue. At first, it seemed to go well for the French. The Spanish section of the island was quickly occupied with the help of the resident white and mulatto population. Black garrisons and other ports surrendered to oncoming French brigades. In 10 days, Leclerc captured all the key ports and coastal forts and was preparing an offensive into the interior. But Toussaint Louverture remained beyond his grasp, and another black general, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, rampaged throughout the countryside, slaughtering every white person he found, and any black who tried to help them. An attempt at negotiations failed, and on February 1802, Leclerc launched an offensive against Louverture's interior stronghold, Gonnies. Advancing in 4 columns, the French discovered they had to wade through fire and bayonets for every foot of ground. Losses were heavy on both sides, but the offensive paid off when several black generals switched sides. Leclerc combined forces with lavish offers of money and power to those who joined him in a pacified Saint Domingue. General Leclerc discovered a strange illness was creeping through the French part of his army. Soldiers weakened without warning. In a day, they were too sick to walk. Then came black vomit, yellowing skin, convulsions, and death. The disease was yellow fever, inflicted by the bite of the female mosquito, Aedes aegypti. But the French commander, as determined and as ruthless as his imperious brother-in-law, pressed his offensive, and soon more black generals, notably the gifted Jean Christophe, switched sides. On May the 1st, Toussaint Louverture suddenly agreed to peace terms. He would give up power and retire with a moderate-sized bodyguard to a plantation in the interior. His generals and officers would receive equivalent ranks in the French army, which became 50% black. Toussaint had learned that Napoleon had signed a definitive treaty of peace with the British at Amiens. This left him and his army at the mercy of Bonaparte's vastly superior numbers and weaponry. The black leader capitulated, hoping to get the best possible deal from Leclerc. Louverture's murderous second-in-command, Dessalines, suddenly accepted similar terms on May 6th. The war was far from over. Guerrilla resistance continued to flare throughout the interior of the island. Leclerc also confronted problems beyond Saint-Domingue's horizon. In the first months of 1802, Jefferson and his Secretary of State, James Madison, learned that the French now owned Louisiana. Next, the American ambassador in London warned them of Napoleon's plans to make Saint-Domingue a mere way station on Leclerc's voyage to New Orleans. Jefferson's love affair with the French Revolution came to an abrupt halt under the influence of the cooler, more suspicious Madison. On Saint-Domingue, Aedes aegypti was still hard at work, decimating the French regiments. Noting Leclerc's growing weaknesses, a watchful Louverture began intriguing for a comeback. Leclerc was watching him too. Lured to a nearby plantation, without his usual armed escort, the black leader was seized, thrown on a ship, and deported to France as a common criminal. There, Napoleon deposited him in a freezing fortress in the Jura Mountains, where Louverture would die a year later. At this point, Bonaparte made a ruinous blunder. Pressured by refugee planters from Saint-Domingue and by numerous merchants in Le Havre and other French ports who had grown rich on the slave trade, he decided to reimpose slavery on Saint-Domingue and other French islands. When word of this decision reached Saint-Domingue in June 1802, the black masses rose in fury against the French and the black soldiers allied with them. Captain General Leclerc was stunned by the ferocity of the blacks' resistance. Quote, "These men die with an incredible fanaticism. They laugh at death. It is the same with the women," end quote, he said. General Leclerc ordered Charles-Louis Pichon to obtain food and war material from America. He was even more eager for Jefferson and Madison to make good on their promise to starve the blacks into submission. The President and Secretary of State informed the dismayed Pichon that they would not be able to starve the rebels after all. An agitated Pichon reported that he found President Jefferson very reserved and cold. Badly weakened by a growing food shortage and lack of medical supplies, the French were unable to sustain their counteroffensive. Whole regiments began succumbing to yellow fever. Soon, an appalling 60% of General Leclerc's staff was dead. On November 2nd, 1802, the French commander himself succumbed. A grimly determined Napoleon poured in 15,000 replacements and continued the struggle. For a while, the fresh troops seemed on the way to restoring French control of the island. But in Europe, events were unfolding that soon turned these victories into hollow triumphs. The British decided that their experiment with a purportedly peace-loving Napoleon was not working. It soon became obvious that the war for world supremacy was about to resume. With that near certainty in mind, Napoleon rethought his plans for Louisiana. Bonaparte badly needed money for his war machine. When Ambassador Robert R. Livingston visited him in early 1803, Napoleon asked him how much he'd be willing to pay for all of Louisiana. The amazed ambassador was soon joined by Special Envoy James Monroe, who could speak for President Jefferson. By July 1803, they had bought 868,000 square miles of North America, a third of the continent, for $15 million. Napoleon continued the struggle to subdue Saint-Domingue, stirring fears that he might repudiate the Louisiana deal. But the moment news of the declaration of renewed war reached the Caribbean, the British West Indies fleet made Saint-Domingue target number one. The Royal Navy bombarded French-held seaports and smuggled guns and encouragement to the rebels. In November 1803, their army reduced to 8,000 men. The French retreated to Cap Francois and surrendered to a British fleet cruising offshore. While France's hopes of colonial wealth and power vanished forever, triumph was the order of the day in Washington, D.C. A special session of Congress confirmed President Jefferson's decision to pay Napoleon's price for New Orleans and the Louisiana Territory, doubling the size of the United States. Jefferson, with his gift for the electrifying phrase, declared the entire North American continent would soon become an empire of liberty. Thank you for watching this clip of The Fog and the Whirlwind. Please be sure to like and comment. It helps new podcasts in the algorithm. I appreciate all your support. If you want to watch the full episode, please wait, and it'll be out on Saturday here on YouTube and Rumble and Odyssey. If you want to listen to the full episode sooner than that, you can find it on Spotify and Substack. There will be links to it in the description of this video.